I'm so excited that the first conversation that we're having today is one I have been thinking about for months now, because I just wrote a story about it in the special Climate Forward section that's included in today's paper. So for our first conversation, it's my honor to welcome the former mayor of New York City, Mike Bloomberg, the former administrator of the Environmental Protection Agency, Gina McCarthy, and Reverend Lennox Yearwood, who I'm just going to call Rev. Come on out, everyone. Thank you all for being here. So the story that I just wrote and is in the paper today is about Bloomberg Philanthropies. Over $1 billion now effort to shut down and decommission and prevent the construction of fossil fuel facilities of all types around the country and really around the world. And Mike, this began 13 years ago with your efforts to start funding the Beyond Coal campaign by the Sierra Club. You spent a bunch of money on that, and it was remarkably successful. With the help of Bloomberg Philanthropies money, the Sierra Club and other activist organizations helped retire some 70% of the coal-fired power plants in the United States. You've now taken on a much tougher challenge, though, which is preventing the construction of new petrochemicals facilities around the country. About 150 are on your target list, and these are facilities that are making fertilizers, plastics, and packaging. And so just to answer the most basic question, why is it that you have turned your attention and your formidable resources to attacking the petrochemicals business, which is really a growing business across much of the country?
Well, we've made enormous progress in America, getting 70% of the coal-fired power plants closed and stopping the building of any new ones. 50% in Europe, so we're doing okay there. And it's not a battle that we've won yet, but you go on to the next one simultaneously. Natural gas, methane is another one of the things. Methane is an enormous polluter, stays in the atmosphere more so than CO2, and something we really have to focus on. And then petrochemicals is obvious because more and more people are using them. And while we want the products that they help produce, they don't necessarily have to be produced in a ways that at the same time you're polluting the planet and ending life as we know it. And in fact, some of the petrochemical products that they produce aren't really very good for us. If you go and next time you eat fish, there will be plastic in the fish that you're eating. You cannot catch a fish today that doesn't have plastic in it. And in fact, human beings are starting to show up. If you get a blood test, there's a good chance you'll have plastic in it.
That's sobering data right there. Yeah. And I want to talk to Administrator McCarthy about that soon. But first, let me ask, when I was reporting this story over the last few months, I was in Louisiana. I'm going to talk to Rev about some experiences we had down there. Yeah. But many of the plants you're targeting for shutting down and blocking the construction of are in places like West Virginia, Ohio, Pennsylvania. And the economic development groups, the companies, even the residents in some of these places are saying, who are you to tell us that we can't grow our economy, grow our businesses in our own backyard?
I'm not trying to tell them. I'm trying to inform them of what the best science we have says, and then they can make decisions as what goes on in their neighborhood.
Okay, okay. I want to come back to that, but first let me turn to Administrator McCarthy. You have spent plenty of time inside Washington, and now you're assisting Bloomberg Philanthropies in these campaigns.
Yes.
Why plastics? When you were asked to help with the Beyond Petrochemicals campaign, I think a lot of people, we use plastic all day. There's plastic all around us, as Mike said. It's in practically every product we use. Why was it so important for you, as someone who's familiar with all sorts of environmental pollution, to focus on petrochemicals?
Well, David, I came in here with probably a larger mission than petrochemicals, which are extremely important. I came in here for all the Beyond campaigns. I came in for America's All In, because we all have to pitch in. And there's leadership all across the country. There's 5,000 people engaged. So we have a real moment in time to move forward. I think I saw the power of the Beyond Coal campaign. I saw what it did. I was the assistant administrator at the time at EPA, running the air programs, and we ran into all of the Sierra Club folks. We saw the kind of power it brought with coalitions, with real data, understanding the health consequences. It mattered. And that with regulation changed so much. But what's happening now is we have to go more. And that's why this beyond carbon, C-A-R-B-O-N, for those of you who don't know Bostonian. The beyond carbon is really an extremely important effort moving forward, because the one thing we don't want to see is with the rise of clean energy that makes coal absolutely not cost effective. Those are going to be moving out soon. The challenge is what fills that, and it has to be clean energy. It cannot be natural gas. Natural gas is methane with a little handful of sprinklings of hydrocarbons. Why do we want it? We don't want it. And so I think that's extremely important. And then you have the petrochemical industry. Look, David, you know as well as I, you were there. Was it a nice neighborhood? Was this a nice opportunity for you to go around and see the trees and the people and picnicking? These are very difficult areas because these are very polluting industries. And frankly, the challenge with petrochemical is that it is nothing other than oil. And what the Beyond Petrochemical effort is all about is, first of all, stop the expansions that are proposed, there's zillions of them, stop the new ones, and let's admit that 300 of those facilities may be sufficient right now.
Yeah, and to your point, petrochemicals represent the vast majority of projected growth in the oil industry globally for the next many years ahead, which I think maybe highlights some of those environmental concerns quite vividly, but also, I have to say, comes back to the economic tension that we were talking about earlier, and I want to talk about again. Rev, I want to turn to you. One of the interesting things about this campaign when I learned about it was that it's working on a bunch of different levels. There's the Sierra Club, there's Bloomberg Philanthropies, but a lot of the money is actually going to on-the-ground activists, people of color in many cases, who are living in extremely close proximity to these plants, to these facilities. Many of them have cancer themselves. Rev and I were with some of them down there in an area known as Cancer Alley just last month. Rev, what brought you to this fight personally?
Well, let me start there. And for those, you're going to go from a Boston accent to a Louisiana accent. We apologize in advance if there's a little struggle there.
Guess who's who?
Yeah, well, yeah. You can figure that one out in the process. You know, David, the nickname of Cancer Alley in America is unacceptable. The fact that we have a place where we have mothers, fathers, children who are getting asthma, emphysema, and cancer, and are dying because of the industry. So let me actually follow up a little bit on your last question and talk about because the economics, because I think this is the thing for me that I am so proud of what Mr. Bloomberg has done, is that, and we all have been public servants. So obviously, Mr. Bloomberg has been the mayor. Gina was the EPA administrator. I was a U.S. Air Force officer. So we all understand what it means to serve our country and what it means to fight for not Republicans or Democrats, but for Americans. So I lead into that by saying the fact that someone's business plan means a death sentence for somebody else in that community, then if that's the only way that you can make money, and we want people to make money, but if that's the only way that you can make money, knowing that you're causing people to die, that's wrong. And then on top of that, when you are intentionally putting these industries that you know is causing harm in communities that may not have the resources, may not have the structure to fight back, literally making them sacrifice zones, then that's not the American way.
Yeah.
So then when you have someone and they think that they can just push over either Jill Hunkler in Ohio River Valley or to Sharon Levine at Rise St. James and St. James Parish, when they think they can do that, they just do that. And that's also un-American to be bullying. But then when you have someone coming in and saying enough is enough, because the emissions from that, the crisis from that is going to make all of us frontline communities. And then you have someone like a Mike Bloomberg who then gives the stones to the Davids to fight the Goliath. Then you have a different situation going on.
Well, that David and Goliath dynamic, I think, was actually on vivid display
Most definitely.
last month when you and I were doing some reporting for this very story. And I'm going to do something a little unconventional here. I'm going to try to bring everyone in the room and on the live stream sort of into an experience that Rev and I had. So I'm just going to set the scene. I'm going to tell the story very quickly, and then I just want your brief thoughts on what this all means. So we were out there with Sharon Levine and Rise St. James. We drove off the main highway to a rural road. We were in the middle of nowhere. There was no one else in sight. We were at the edge of a property that had been slated to be the South Louisiana methanol complex, but that activists, with the help of Bloomberg Philanthropies, have blocked in the last year or so.
That's right.
As we're there, a pickup truck drives up right behind us and blocks us in against the fence. The gentleman in the car gets out and very angrily confronts us. He says we're trespassing, though there were no signs that indicated that. We offered to leave. We said we were sorry. We did not realize that. We offered to leave. He then gets in his truck and starts driving somewhat aggressively and says he's calling some people. And I have to say, it was one of the couple times in my reporting experience where I've actually been afraid for my own safety. It was very unclear.
It could be the end.
It was unclear for a couple minutes how this was going to end. Some of your team dialed 911 and requested assistance from the local sheriffs, and they came. For the next hour, that's a big selfie of me. I'm sorry to do that to y'all. But there's me and Rev and 2 Louisiana sheriffs, and for an hour in 110-degree heat that day, we and Sharon and Shamira, her daughter, were detained in 110-degree heat as they asked us questions about what we were doing. They talked to the landowner. And eventually, the situation was diffused because of sort of an extraordinary moment. Sharon and the gentleman in the truck actually started talking. And they realized they knew a bunch of people in common. But he explained to her why he was so angry. He was indeed the landowner of that land, but he had expected to sell it to South Louisiana Methanol. And when she and her team, with your funding, blocked that development, he suddenly was out of what he thought was going to be a life-changing windfall. So we got out of that, and the day went on. But Rev, I wonder if you could reflect on what that incident told you about activists like Shamira and Miss Sharon are dealing with every day.
Well, before that, David, if you remember, we had just left a plantation. And what people should know is that a lot of the folks in the industry are so cynical that in this part of Louisiana, people would say it's called plantation country. And in that, folks are literally harming through air pollution, bad water, many other things. They're now building these plants, or want to put the expansion of these plants on former plantation sites. So the place where my parents and my parents' parents, in essence, were enslaved, that's the place that they want to put these production sites. And so we had just left that. And so I was already very filled with that just in my spirit. For me, on one hand, very, I'm excited that we're at this place because it took all of us, black, white, brown, red, male, female, straight, gay, theist, atheist, Americans, so we can be a place where we can be black and white, we could be together. But I was also in a place where remembering that. And so we were in the car, and then to have somebody just block us off, one, not know what they're carrying, not know what they're doing aggressively, and we're on this toxic tour, and we're literally just looking at where they would put these facilities next to elementary schools, next to churches. And so we're sitting here, I'm thinking to myself, actually, to you, Mike, I'm thinking to myself, man, I'm so glad. I think we've already blocked, thank goodness, I think already 5 of these facilities. But I'm thinking there, on one hand, I'm thinking that, man, I'm so glad we're doing this work. On the other hand, for the first time, for me, as a brother, I'm thinking, because on the phone we had the New York Times security and we had the Bloomberg security. I don't even have that kind of security. I'm like, oh, this is great. So, I'm like, I'm glad we have that. But in that process, I think that it shows why we have to fund the fighters and protect them. Because I realized then that folks like Miss Sharon and Shamira, and mostly women and women of color, are the ones on the front lines fighting for us simply to have clean air and clean water. And also to know that plastic ain't just plastics, that plastics is oil and gas.
Right.
Let's be very clear. And that there are alternatives to that. So I think that the fact that they were there and always in this 100+, one of the hottest days ever, we were outside, lets me know that not only can we transition, but we must transition.
Thank you, Rev. Mike, let me turn back to you again for the high-level rationale for this work. When we spoke last week for this story, you called climate change, you used very stark language. You said it was something that can destroy the earth and kill all living people.
Yes.
I want to, though, contrast that remark with something that Bill Gates, who I'm going to be speaking with later today, said at your very event on Tuesday, when he said, the planet will be okay, speaking on your stage. And that's such a range of outcomes.
He's right. I said there's a potential to do it if we can stop polluting. Yes, you can keep that from happening, we hope. It's not clear that we haven't already passed a point where there is no coming back. We used to talk about by 2050 we would do something, then about 2040, then 2030. It's not clear that 2025 isn't, you're going to step over the line where these things feed on themselves. And there's an awful lot of evidence that the world is changing. The dams are breaking, 10,000 people drown in one place, and nobody talks about it. We have earthquakes, we have floods and droughts, and take a look. In America, the left center of the country, the west center of the country, the desert is expanding. The rivers are running dry. Take a look at China and India running out of water. And so if there are three polluting countries here that really do the vast bulk of it, America, India, and China. And all three of them, if they look internally, they should say, wait a second, we're going to wind up as one big desert. We've got to do something about it. And so I'm a little bit optimistic about China and India and America coming along. But that's not to say that we aren't going to go backwards and allow another plant or stop somebody from doing something that's intelligent.
And when you think about allocating your resources, you're focused on coal, we know that. We know you're focused somewhat on gas, now petrochemicals. Why not big oil, though? I mean, when you look at the record profits that companies like Exxon, Chevron, Shell are experiencing, a lot of people would say the resources that you're spending on these fights could be very well directed trying to get them to reduce their emissions.
We are not going to get away from using oil for the next 10 or 15 years. And we're not going to say everybody that has a gas-guzzling car can't drive it anymore and they'll have to start walking today. You have to be practical. I think the Secretary General picking the UAE as the site for COP28 and having Dr. Sultan, the guy from the UAE who was running the thing, is a smart thing to do because you've just got to get big oil to, you've got to try to co-opt them and have their practices somewhat better, but it's irrational to think that they're all going to go away. And so big oil is part of the problem. They're also part of the solution. You've got UAE, Saudi Arabia. America is maybe the third largest producer of gas oil in the world. These countries have to find another ways to feed their people, and we have to transition people's driving from a gas guzzling to an electric one. And then we've got to make sure the electricity that they're using was generated efficiently. But that's the first thing is to get those. You go to China, you cannot buy a internal combustion bicycle or motorcycle or automobile in China. They just never deliver them. They're delivering the electric ones. They are really doing something.
Everything you just sketched out speaks to the monumental task at hand, which is why we have plenty to write about. Gina, please.
David, I just wanted to respond on the Bill Gates quote, you know, because I often say that the planet will be fine. It will be.
So what do you mean by that?
It's the people that
That's right.
won't be.
It's the people.
I mean, really, let's get real. One of the reasons why the campaigns that Mike has been sponsoring works is because they bring it down to the people level. I'm tired of arguing about greenhouse gas emissions. The issue is that people are unhealthy. They shouldn't be. There are ways to address that. If you're worried about jobs, look at the clean energy jobs that we're actually producing now. Look at 20,000 kids now being announced with America's, what do you call it?
Climate Corps.
CCC, Climate Corps. This is an opportunity of a lifetime. So, you know, when you frame it like, oh, look at how bad this is, of course it's about economics, but what is our economic future? If we're contaminating our own people to get to that future, it's not right.
Right.
And so part of this is recognizing we have the potential. This is not a sacrifice or a gigantic challenge as much as recognizing where we have to head and all running in that direction. And so I feel badly about some of the jobs that may be lost over time, but I have to also point to the zillions of jobs that are going to be open that don't harm communities, that give good pay for their communities, that allow us ability to save money for families. That's the future I want that we have to fight for, not at the expense of that gentleman, but because that gentleman has a perfect opportunity to join in clean energy, to change the way he does agriculture, to move forward to make his land and his life productive. And so this should never be about sacrifice or about job loss, but it is clearly about a clean energy economy that we need to grow here in the
One of the
United
things you
States.
should look at, the people that are building these plants, where do they live?
Yeah.
None of them are going to live downwind from what they're building.
That's right.
They just aren't. They're not going to raise their kids that way either. You take advantage of people who don't have the ability to stir up the press and to get visibility and from the legislators and that sort of thing. And they build it in those neighborhoods where education starts out to be poor and it just feeds on itself. And yes, you'll create some jobs there, but you're going to destroy a lot of other jobs. And when we measure the jobs that are created, you also got to take out the jobs that are moving away because people don't want to live in that neighborhood.
And David, I just wanted to say that on that note, for me, I mean, I wish I worked with the HipHop Caucus and from day one from Hurricane Katrina.
Yeah.
And next year marks 19 years for Hurricane Katrina hitting New Orleans. We can't bring them people back. And I'm telling you, for someone who's called in my community to bury babies, and if you've ever seen a child's casket, it's the worst thing. And when you have children who are dying because of asthma and emphysema, simply because we can transition, and not that we don't have the solutions, we do. That's outrageous. And I agree with Mike and Gina so much. It becomes almost disgusting that you then look at certain communities, fellow Americans, and say that I can just put this in that community and give them a death sentence while I ride on my yacht. That ain't it.
Yeah.
And we have to stop that.
Yeah, thank you for that, Rev. Mike, we're running short on time, but I do have one important question that may be our last, and it relates to the future of your philanthropy and the future of your company. There's been a lot of reporting lately about the fate of Bloomberg LP, which is your financial data firm that has given you the ability to fund these kind of campaigns. Just in the last couple weeks, you replaced your entire board and your CEO. You have indicated that you would transfer the company to Bloomberg Philanthropies, potentially making it the largest foundation in the world, perhaps. But there's been a lot of vagueness about exactly what might happen then. For the record today, can you clarify what are your plans, what are your intentions with Bloomberg LP and its transfer to Bloomberg Philanthropies? And if it does get transferred, what happens then?
Well, I give virtually all of the company's profits to the foundation, and the foundation gives away last year $1.7 billion. This year it'll be a little bit more than that. But when I die, the foundation inherits the company. They, because of tax laws, will have to get rid of it, sell it someplace or other over the first 5 years. I wanted to make sure that I'm 81 years old. Common sense says I should have succession plans, and so I've straightened out, everybody knows who's going to run the company down the road. I've got a board that I think can contribute a lot to how they will behave in a world where I'm not there, and maybe they'd be a public company, maybe not. So I'm trying to do things, prepare for things, and I'd like to stay around for a while. I have no intention of selling it tomorrow. I'd like to work, I don't know, 3-5 years more at least. But it is true, as I get older, you forget names and you don't run as fast as you did, and getting old is not for sissies. I'm a very lucky guy, and I have a chance to make the world better. I have daughters and grandchildren that I want to make sure their life is better, and they're very philanthropic, and I think appreciate what is being done with their name is there. It's a wonderful chance to make a difference, and shame on people who don't do it. What else are you going to do if you make a lot of money? You have to do something with it. And I know exactly what I want to do. We're working on the climate, we're working on culture, we're working on a whole bunch of things. Education is one of our big interests. We just gave $800 million for charter schools across the country, and my alma mater, Johns Hopkins, some new buildings and things like that.
Well, in the story in today's paper, I described you as a very expensive thorn in the side of the fossil fuel industry, and it sounds like that is going to be the case for many years to come. Thank you to all three of you for joining us. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Appreciate it. Thank you, Gina. Thank you, guys.